Hello, my Juicy co-creators. Lilou here on the Juicy Living Tour, and today with Dr. Joe. Oh my goodness.
Happy to be with you.
I am very, very happy to be with you. We're actually right outside of Olympia in Washington, south of Seattle, north of Portland, all the way northwest of the United States. And it's going to be, this is a very exciting conversation because really science is a bridge to many things. And here we're going to go, you're interested about neuroscience and the brain and the memory and the cells, and you were featured in the What the Bleep Do We Know? And you wrote a book, Evolve Your Brain?
Evolve Your Brain, the Science of Changing Your Mind.
So tell us, how can we use our brain to change our reality? What's really going on in the brain so we can start, should I say, rewiring it so that we start experiencing a new reality?
Well, I think science is the contemporary language of mysticism. I think that when we learn a bit about the brain or a bit about neuroscience or quantum physics, it gives us a little hint about how we can apply it to our lives to do a better job. Now, we have three brains that allow us to go from thinking to doing to being. Your thinking brain is your neocortex. That's that walnut-shaped, corrugated, big brain that sits on the outside. And that part of your brain is responsible for your conscious awareness. You're listening to me right now with your neocortex. And every time you learn something new, you make a new connection in your brain. That's what learning is. Learning is molding synaptic connections. Remembering is maintaining and sustaining connections. So you read a book on how to ride a bicycle, you read a book on how to dance the salsa, you read a book on how to cook French cuisine, you read a book on how to build a doghouse, you read a book about compassion by the Dalai Lama. All that information is stored in your thinking brain. Now, the purpose of all of that philosophical knowledge is to take it and apply it, to personalize it, to demonstrate it. And when you take what you learn and you modify your behavior in some way, you do something with it, you change your actions, you're going to have a new experience. When you have a new experience, gangs of neurons begin to organize themselves to reflect the event. So when you're in the midst of an experience, everything you're seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling and hearing, all of your five senses are immersed in the environmental experience. And as all of the sensory data rushes back to your brain through five different pathways, jungles of neurons organize themselves and string into place. And the moment they organize into a pattern, the brain releases a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. So feelings and emotions then are the end product of past experience. So let's say you read the book by the Dalai Lama or about compassion, or you read a book about forgiveness. And you could repeat all that information. It was all theory. It was all fact. It was knowledge. It was void of experience. But when you actually forgive someone or you demonstrate compassion, the moment you feel what that feeling feels like, the emotions that you're experiencing are teaching your body what your mind has intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. So the moment you get your behaviors to match your intentions, or you get your actions equal to your thoughts, the moment you align mind and body, you're going to have a new experience, and that new experience is going to produce a new emotion. And the moment you have a new experience that produces a new emotion, your body is genetically changing to reflect a new environmental experience. That's called evolution. And when you do that, the second brain becomes activated, the limbic brain or the emotional brain or the chemical brain. But it's not enough to do it once. We have to be able to repeat the experience, be able to do it over and over again. And whenever you can replicate an experience at will, when you can do it over and over and over again, there comes a moment where you activate that third brain called the cerebellum. And when you can do something over and over again, you've done it so many times that you no longer have to think about it. Now you're in a state of being. And a state of being is when mind and body are working together, or better said, you've practiced it so many times that your body knows as well as your brain. And the moment your body knows as well as your brain, or your mind and body are one, that's called being it. And when we're in a state of being, the quantum field or the universal principle says that everything responds to who we're being. So that evolution using the brain from going from thinking to doing to being is really the steps we take to be able to do a better job in our life.
So before we go in this really beautiful bliss state where everything is pure synchronicity, magic, we can even say, and really this really, really beautiful, deep, joyful experience. There's those challenges. There's those patterns that have been there for many, many, many years. How do we break through that? How do we even start to forgive somebody, for example, that has been there, and we have a lot of resentment and anger.
Sure.
And the paths are going like this.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's really the basis of why it's so hard to change. If you think about it, we said that emotions and feelings are the end product of experience, and we've all been branded from experiences that produce really strong emotions. And when we have a really strong emotional experience from some event in our life, we notice a change in our internal chemistry. We notice we feel differently, and then we pay attention to whoever or whatever it was that caused that. Now, every time there's an emotional reaction to some experience, good or bad, traumatic or crisis or whatever, there's a refractory period of chemicals that's created. And if you don't know how to control that chemical reaction, and you let those emotions linger for hours or days, that's called a mood. Well, what's wrong with you? Oh, I'm in a mood. Why are you in a mood? Well, this thing happened to me 5 days ago. Now, if you keep that refractory period going on for months on end, weeks or months, that's called a temperament. Why is she so angry? Oh, well, I don't know. Why are you so angry? Well, this thing happened to me 11 months ago, and I'm memorizing my emotional reaction. Now, if you keep that refractory period going for years on end, that's called a personality trait. So we tend to have experiences that produce strong emotions, and those emotions tend to drive the way we think and the way we behave. And that emotion then becomes one long refractory period that becomes part of our personality. If we want to change then that emotion, or change some aspect of ourselves, we have to begin to unmemorize that emotion, because that emotion colors us and flavors how we think and act. Now here's the problem. Those emotions that we respond to that creates, the emotions of anger and judgment and hatred and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering, the chemicals that are created in the body from those emotions are highly addictive. They give the body a rush of energy, and what happens over time is people become unconsciously addicted to the emotion to reaffirm who they are connected to some past experience. So the person may consciously want to try to change, but they've memorized an emotion that's pretty much become part of their identity. So take it a step further. If the person's had an experience that produced a very strong emotion, and that emotion is driving the way they think and the way they behave, we could say then, the moment the person has a thought, the thought produces a chemical in their brain that signals their body for them to feel exactly the way they were just thinking, unhappy or negative. The moment they feel negative, they think more negative thoughts. And this cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking over time conditions the body to memorize that emotion better than the conscious mind. And whenever the body knows better than the mind, that's called a habit. A habit is when the body is the mind. Now, 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old sits in a subconscious memory system, a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions that are happening behind the scenes of our awareness. So now the person wants to try to change and use 5% of their conscious mind to go against 95% of what they memorize. So they think positively, but they feel negatively. So mind and body are in opposition. They pray for a new life, and they set their intention for a great future, but they feel guilty. It's mind and body in opposition. We have to recondition the body to the new mind. And that's what meditation is about. Meditation, the whole purpose of meditation, is to actually get into the operating system of the subconscious and begin to make measurable changes. And the word meditation literally means, in Tibetan, to become familiar with. So if you're sitting down in a meditation and you're becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, of your unconscious behaviors, your unconscious habits, your unconscious emotions, and you're noticing them and becoming aware of them, that's meditation. You're becoming familiar with that aspect of the old self.
As an observer rather than reacting.
Actually, that concept in neuroscience is called metacognition. And the fact that we can pay attention to who we're being means then that we can modify our behaviors to do a better job in life.
But yet they come up. So what do we do when they're coming up so that we change and rewire it in that moment? You're saying only meditation can do that?
No, I'm not saying only meditation can do it. I mean, the process of change requires unlearning and relearning. It requires breaking the habit of an old self and reinventing a new self.
Yeah.
It requires what we call in neuroscience pruning synaptic connections, breaking apart those circuits, and then sprouting new connections. It requires unmemorizing an emotion that's been stored in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind or to a new emotion. It requires literally losing your mind and creating a new one. It requires changing your energy. So when a person's in the midst of an emotional experience, normally if they react during that emotional experience, they're always going to say things like, I should have never said that. I should have never done that. I should have never thought that. I should have never sent that email. Because those emotions are driving them to act like an amped up animal with a big memory bank. So the difficulty is learning how to shorten the refractory period of those emotions. That's called emotional intelligence. To be able to learn how to regulate and mediate that. And one of the things that meditation does is it allows people to create more coherence in their brain and body, which means that they don't have the same knee-jerk reactions in the same circumstances. And that's what we can control. We can control our inner environment in the beginning more than we can control our outer environment.
So as those thoughts emerge, let's say in meditation, we're in the space of observing them, where anger comes up or frustration, and then we would just notice them and go back to the meditation, and therefore once we're in life, we have that similar reaction?
If you think about it, if you're in a meditation and your body has been conditioned to be the mind, right? And if you could think of your body as the servant to the mind, or the animal, like an unbridled horse. And when we put our body away in a meditation, it's not used to no longer being plugged into the environment. It wants to get up and do things to stimulate some emotion so it can reaffirm its identity. So when you sit in a meditation and you separate yourself from the environment, you're putting your body away and your body is no longer getting its emotional needs met. It's going to buck like an unbridled horse. It's going to kick. It's going to rebel. And every time you bring it back to the present moment, every time you're able to calm it down and bring it back into a relaxed state, every time you notice that it wants to do that and you inhibit its actions, that's reconditioning the body to the new mind. So if you're able to break that cycle while you're sitting in the meditation, you overcome some aspect of yourself, and you've basically broken free from that addiction. Anytime you break free from any addiction, the side effect is true joy. That's the liberation of energy, that the body begins to feel like the chains are being broken away. When that happens, then, if you're overcoming some aspect of yourself and the emotion is no longer in you because you've overcome it, then you can walk into your life and no longer respond to the same conditions in the same way. And so the purpose of meditation, then, is not only to become familiar with the old self and its thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, but to become familiar with the new self. So if you began to ask yourself in your meditation, what is the greatest ideal of myself that I can be today? How would a great person think? How would they act? How would they feel? And if you said, I'm not going to get up until I am this person, you would have to overcome some aspect of yourself in order to do that. Now, as you begin to contemplate who you would like to be, as you begin to think about who you would like to be in your life, who you'd like to be when you open your eyes, how you would like to live your life, the moment you begin to think differently than you normally think, you're forcing your brain to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, and new combinations. And whenever you make the brain work differently, you're changing your mind. Mind is the brain in action. Mind is the brain at work. So as you begin to make your brain fire in new ways, nerve cells that fire together wire together. So in time, you begin to install the hardware of the new self ahead of the actual experience before you walk out into your life. You're warming up your brain into a new level of mind, so you begin the process of using those circuits in the rest of your day. Now, the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thoughts more real than anything else. That's the privilege, and we do it all the time. Now, the moment you're in a meditation and you are dreaming or you're rehearsing a new way of being, if you're truly focused and you're truly paying attention, there'll come a moment when your forebrain becomes so activated, becomes so awake, that the thought that you're thinking about will literally become the experience. And as you put all your attention on that thought, and the thought becomes the experience, the end product of the experience is called an emotion. You hadn't have to do anything, but your brain does not know the difference between the actual event that produces the experience and the thought that you have in your brain. To the body, which is the unconscious mind, it doesn't know the difference. So the body gets the emotional signal ahead of the actual environment, and the body begins to change. And if you could reproduce that same emotional state every single day, you would begin to condition your body to a new mind so that your body is no longer living in the emotions of the past, but now aligned to some future destiny. And when you can get your mind and body working together, now you're in a state of being. So then if you can become familiar with this new state of being every day, then you're no longer living a reality that's connected to the same personality any longer. You are now headed to a new destiny.
Do you also look at the impact of people being authentic and vulnerable and really opening up and actually when we really start to really get real with ourselves too, does that have an impact?
Absolutely. Now here's the thing that I've learned about human nature over the last 12 years. I think that most people wait for crisis or trauma or loss or disease or diagnosis to get about the business of change. They wait till the ego has been knocked to its knees, to its lowest denominator, where they finally say, I can't go on living this life the same way. And they begin to inspect their own way of thinking. They begin to pay attention to their own behaviors and ask, is this really loving to me? Is this really serving me? Is this really healthy for me? They notice the emotions that they've been holding on to that are connected to experiences from 20 or 30 years ago. And they realize that those emotions are actually dysregulating and downregulating their own genes that are creating their own disease. And they have to surrender the old self at a certain point. I think in this day and age, I think the new message, and certainly my message is, why wait to that point? We can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or we can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. And so getting truthful with yourself, to know thyself, that's another definition of meditation, to become so aware, to become so conscious of those unconscious programs that they would never slip by unnoticed. And so we have to ask ourselves, do I want to allow a thought to go by my conscious awareness that I don't want to experience? So you get to a point where you begin to become the king or the queen on the throne, and you say, that thought may not pass today, because if I allow it to pass, it's going to stimulate my brainstem and turn me into a familiar state of being. So that denaturing of the ego and the personality requires an authenticity and a level of awareness and a level of self-honesty that we can actually do every single day without having crisis or trauma. We can do it because we're excited to be alive. And the beauty behind all of this is when you're truly in a creative state, when you're truly creating, my definition of creation is when you forget about you. You're so involved with what you're doing. You're so present in the moment. Whether you're in a meditation or whether you're hiking in nature, whether you're filming, whether you're writing, whether you're cooking, it doesn't matter. When you're truly in a state of creation, you're so involved and so present in that moment that you literally lose track of time and space. You forget about your problems. You forget about time. You forget about your body. You forget about your pain. You forget about your identity. You become so involved with what you're doing that your brain changes to the point where your identity, your personality is vacated for a few moments. And that's where energy moves from those survival emotional centers in the body right up to the heart.
Yes.
And the moment it moves to the heart, you start to feel inspired.
Because it looks like in that space then the brain is not as present or needed, but it's the heart that takes over and it is guidance and it comes to us. I mean, that's
what I call the natural state of being. Now, we live in two states of mind. We either live in a state of survival or we live in a state of creation, or what we would call, those lower emotions of stress and those elevated emotions of joy and love. So if you think about this, 90% of people on the planet, for the most part, 90% of the time, live by the emotions of stress. And every time you have a reaction to something in your life that you consider threatening or that you're uncertain about, it's no different than when a gazelle is being chased by a lion in the Serengeti. When the gazelle sees the lion, it turns on its fight or flight nervous system, and it mobilizes all of this energy for an emergency. And when the body mobilizes all of this energy, the brain and the body get a rush of energy, and those chemicals are highly addictive. Now, those emotions of stress that are created are the exact emotions of aggression and anger and hatred and judgment and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and hopelessness and powerlessness. And 90% of the time, people are living in those emotional states. And those emotional states endorse the ego to become very selfish, very self-involved, very self-indulgent, very self-centered, very self-important, full of self-pity. It's all about the self, because when the gazelle is being chased by the lion, she's only concerned about three things: my body, the environment, and time. So when the gazelle is being chased, it says, I have to take care of my body. My body's a priority. Where in my environment am I going to run, and how much time do I have to get there? So when those emotions of stress are running and the gazelle is over-focused or obsessed about its body, the environment, and time, it's no longer concerned about long-term building projects. It's not concerned about growth and repair and creation and nurturing. It's got to deal with an emergency situation. Now, those chemicals of stress, without a doubt, the scientific fact, begin to break the body down when it's done long-term. Every organism in nature is designed for short-term stress. But when we keep turning on that stress response and we can't turn it off, now we're headed for disease. So the problem with human beings is because we can make thought more real than anything else, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. We can begin to think about our problems, some future worst-case scenario, and we can focus on it with the exclusion of everything else, that the brain begins to signal the body to produce the same chemicals as if the body was in that experience. And the body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between the actual event that's happening in reality and the emotion we're fabricating by thought alone. We can unfold a past bitter memory that's tattooed in the recesses of our gray matter, and like moments it comes to life. And to us it's real. And when we begin to feel those emotions that are connected to the past experience, the body believes it's in the past experience again. And so people begin to condition the body to either live in the past or live in the future, and they miss the moment. Now, in that state where you're in love with life or in love with your creation, or you're exuberant because you're involved in something, the number one ingredient is you have to be absolutely present. And when you're present and you're guided by none of those survival emotions, all of those hormonal centers that are running in the lower part of the body, the adrenal glands and all those centers, there's no energy there anymore. The personality who's thinking and feeling in the same cycle is gone. You're not thinking about that, and all of a sudden energy begins to move right into your heart. This is not a metaphysical thing. This is a scientific, physiological phenomenon. And as energy begins to move into your heart, you become less analytical. You become less judgmental, because it's almost impossible to analyze and judge when you're in a state of love, when you're in a state of joy, when you're in a state of inspiration. And that natural state of being, that creative state, is when the body is liberated from the chains of those very strong emotions. And so the person then in a state of creation is nobody, is no thing, is no time. And the moment we move into that elegant space, the body is jubilant, it's released, and we feel connected to something greater. We feel like we're connected to the source. When we're living in a state of survival, we feel separate, we feel disconnected. We are an animal that's only concerned about the self. The opposite state is a selfless state. You are no longer connected to an ego. The ego is out of the way. And that's what we call the natural state of being. So most people, though, they get to a point of change, and that means they have to lay down the known and step into the unknown. And to step into the unknown, genetically and historically, means that you're stepping into a place that's highly threatening. But if you understand that you have a part in your creation, the unknown then becomes an adventure. It becomes something exciting. And that's when the body begins to reorganize itself.
That's exciting. Are you seeing that there's a lot of people talk about the changes and that our DNA is upgrading and that a lot of things, new energies, new frequencies, is all of that part of our transformation? I mean, are we really truly evolving as human beings to be able to reach faster, maybe that place? And because it is really going to be a matter of survival soon.
Well, I think there's a strong intellectual division going on right now. I think every single paradigm right now in this particular time in history is collapsing. Whether it's the political model or the economic model, whether it's the religious model, whether it's the environment, whether it's the medical model, the educational model, all the systems are breaking down because basically it hasn't been working well up until this point. Now, some people will cling to the familiar. They'll cling to what they think works. And those people that hang on to that are going to be the people that are going to try to do the same thing and expect a different result. Now, I'm saying that with the caveat that if we begin to embrace a new model or a new way of doing things, when we begin to demonstrate greatness, when we begin to demonstrate peace, you can't shake hands with your neighbor at church and say, peace be with you, then get in your car and cut everybody off on the way out. That's, mind doing one thing and body doing another thing. We have to, at this point in history, demonstrate our highest ideal. And when we begin to be the change in a certain way, and we begin to modify our behaviors to have new experiences, the genes then begin to get signaled, and we begin to upscale our genetics and our brain's hardware. Now, we're turning genes on and off every single moment. You and I are turning genes on right now. If you're learning something and I'm learning something or we're engaged in the conversation, we have a whole host of activity going on genetically that's beginning to reorganize who we are. Problem is, we know that the environment turns on the genes. But for someone who's living in the same reality over and over again and doing the same things and thinking the same thoughts and embracing the same emotions, then there's no genetics that are actually going to be changed. So your personality creates your personal reality. It's that simple. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So if you want to create a new personal reality, you're going to have to change one of those three things. And when you do, your brain and body have to change to walk into a new reality. It has to have some change to prepare it ahead of the actual experience. And that's when we begin to look at changing the brain and body by meditation before the environment changes. So then when we change something inside of us, in the way we think and feel, and it produces some effect outside of us, now we'll pay attention to what we did inside of us and we'll do it again. The old model is wait for the environment to signal the gene or change our internal chemistry. When we notice something that's outside of us changes how we feel inside of us, we'll pay attention to whoever caused it and we'll begin to associate that memory. And that's a slow path in evolution, millions of years to adapt to different environmental conditions. Because of the size of the human brain and the forebrain, and because we can make thought more real than anything else, we can begin to fabricate emotions of joy and love and inspiration and gratitude to such a degree that the body, as the unconscious mind, is beginning to believe that future reality is already happening. And now we're signaling new genes in new ways, and the body is prepared for a whole new reality. As a matter of fact, the brain and body look like that reality also has already happened. Now we're on a whole new experience of life.
But it seems with all the information that is being shared right now on through the internet, thanks to the internet too, and wonderful DVDs or teleclass that you're doing, that more and more people are exposed to this information and are expecting an amazing shift, are feeling the energy increases, the frequency being higher, and therefore we are experiencing incredible fast healing, miracles, joyful moments, bliss, more and more frequently.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that's the opposite side of the first division. I talk to people who can tune into that and know that this is an age where there's a whole lot of energetic things happening galactically.
Right? That's what I wanted to hear you.
Well, absolutely. Galactically, there's absolute, changes that's going on in our universe, in our galaxy. up from the sun emitting its photonic emissions. There are alignments happening. Without a doubt, this is a time you and I chose to be here. And it's a rebirth, it's a renaissance, a true renaissance this time. But all of that energy is going to endorse who you're being. It is a raw material, but you have to take it and you have to use it in a way that's going to support you. So if you're living in stress, and you're living in survival, and you're living in hate, and if you're living in judgment, that energy is going to endorse who you're being. It's going to amplify it for you. If you begin to realize that that's a raw material to drive you to your greatest potential, and you begin to decide what's no longer fits in your life, in your world, in your body, in your brain, in your being, and you begin to remove those layers, those masks of those emotions that block the flow of that intelligence that's giving you life right now, that invisible force, that's that spiritual intelligence that's indigenous to all human beings. It's blocked because of the emotions that we wear layer by layer. And as you begin to remove those layers and that intelligence begins to leak out, and you begin to create more coherence in that elevated emotions of joy and love, that energy that's happening in this universe, in this galaxy, with the planets, with alignments, and with photonic emissions, is going to be an acceleration to your greatness. So I just look at it as a energetic time where you're going to have to change your energy. I mean, you're going to have to change your energy to meet that energy. And so the limited emotions that drive us to a lower denominator, to a lower level, that's a very real thing, but it's going to be more amplified. The people who begin to realize that they have to ascend their energy to some degree and open their hearts and begin to speak truth and begin to take on a whole new state of energy. That energy is going to be endorsing their energy, and that's the new age that we're talking about.
Is that more a matter of surrendering rather than changing?
I think the process of change is a delicate balance between intention and surrender. That there's an aspect where people, if we overintend, I think that's called trying, right? And if we surrender too much, then we're not making enough of an effort. So I think it's a really delicate balance. Intention is getting very clear on what you want. And surrendering is trusting in something greater. But you have to think of intention like the sail on a boat or the compass. It's giving us direction. And surrender is letting it blow us in a certain way once we have our direction. So it's a combination of two. I think it's a delicate balance of both.
And if we surrender to this new energy, something new can emerge, because it feels like the brain, that's really how it feels these days, is that the brain really has to be in the back end, or kind of forget it a little bit.
Well, that's true, because the analytical brain, the intellectual brain, the theoretical brain has to take a back seat. And we have to trust in the unseen. I mean, the real question is, can we believe in a future that we can't see or experience with our senses yet? But we've thought about enough times with intention that our brain is literally changed to look like the event has already happened. Now, it takes a certain amount of surrender to believe in a future that isn't a physical reality yet. And can we emotionally embrace that destiny? So much so that we condition the body to believe that future reality has already happened. When we can, our brain and body are no longer a record of the past, but now a map to the future. And to live by that law is to live by the quantum law. So when we can get our brain and body right, and we can surrender, and we can trust in the unseen, and we're not trying to control the outcome, because when you're living in the hormones of stress, you're trying to control the outcome. When you are in an elevated emotion and you are being your best potential, and that energy is no longer sitting down here, but it's sitting in your heart, and you feel expanded, you're trusting a destiny, and you feel connected. And you would never try to control the outcome. You would want it to come in a way that you least expect, that surprises you, that leaves no doubt that what you did inside of you produced that result outside of you. You know it's going to happen. You just don't know when and you don't know how, and that's what surrender is. That's the quantum surprise that we all want in our lives. But
there's this knowing. There's this knowing inside, or this intuition. There's this kind of seed that is planted. There's this potential that we feel ahead.
Absolutely.
And that drives us.
Exactly.
So did the brain create that? I mean...
I think it's a delicate balance between the brain and the heart, mind and body. And so the brain gets clear on what it wants. So, for example, I mean, I always like to make it very practical.
Thank you for that.
If a person says, I want to become wealthy, or I want to become healthy, or I want a meaningful relationship.
All of the above.
All the above. Well, and I want to be happy, throw in a little happiness, right? And people say to me every time I'm interviewed, well, how do we get happy? And I always say the first step is to stop being unhappy, which means you got to become aware of those thoughts that make you unhappy. You got to become aware of those behaviors. You got to become aware of those emotions that are making you feel that way. And that process is a meditative process. It's an introspective process. Now, but when I said to you, get clear on what you want out of those four things, you would say, well, I want to have wealth, and I want to have these things, and I want to live in this place, and I want to... You would have a laundry list of items. Now, that's your brain beginning to use all the stored knowledge and experience in your brain and seamlessly piece it together to create a model or an ideal that you can fix your brain on.
Which is limited.
But it is a destiny that you're projecting towards, right? You still have to get clear of those things that you want. You would also have to say, in order for me to be healthy, I would want to feel vital, I want to feel alive, I want to have extra energy, I want to eat well, I want to exercise, I want to sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours, I want to, you would list those things that you would want. Now, that's the brain just getting clear on what it wants. That's intention. And if you said, well, I want to have such a feeling in my heart that it's so clear, it's so joyful that nothing outside of me could move me from it. That's the happiness I want. And if you said, in a relationship, I want a person who's so independent and doesn't need me or anything, and that we come together and we celebrate our accomplishments, and when we're moved off our center, we can communicate, and then we can really regroup, and then we can move as a team together, and we are moving with the same purpose, and that's called trust. And you develop this idea. Well, that is you taking the anchor out of the past and beginning to throw it into the future. It's important to use the brain to get clear on what we want. Now, that's all the brain needs to do. After that, once it gets clear on what it wants, then the next step is to begin to open our hearts and trust in that outcome without any evidence. Now, that surrendering process is not an easy process because it goes against our very genetics. Why would you give thanks for something that you haven't had yet? You usually wait to get it before you give thanks, right? But if you can allow yourself to get clear on what you want, and then you can open your heart and begin to feel how it would feel when you had all of those things. The moment you begin to open your heart and you begin to give thanks ahead of the actual experience, the moment you do that, your body is beginning to believe that that future event is happening to you now, because the body, as the unconscious mind, is getting the signal of gratitude, which means the event has already happened. Now, that kind of surrender, that kind of trust, is leaving behind the physical evidence. It's leaving behind the body, the environment, and time. And that kind of level of surrender is when we know that we know. When your heart is open and your mind is clear, and you are in a state of being, that level of certainty, that level of knowingness is what people say, how do you know it's going to happen? And you say, I just know. Well, how do you know? Because I'm changed. I feel it. I know that I know. And my definition of enlightenment is knowing that you know. And that is a great place to be, because no one can take it away from you at that point.
I love the stepping in the unknown too, because that is huge.
The only way we can get to anywhere at this point is stepping into the unknown. And that's an interesting concept, because everybody will stand up and cheer about the unknown, but the unknown is like jumping off a 40-foot cliff.
Yeah.
You can walk up, we could stand here and have...
It's a quantum leap.
It is a leap. You and I can have a great conversation about the unknown, and then you get ready to leave your life, or you get to leave the familiar. It's like standing on the cliff. Everybody gets up to that point, and they go, ooh, boy, I bet you that water's cold, and boy, that's looking pretty deep down there, and my father was really overbearing, and God, the wind's blowing the wrong way. We start to analyze our change, and everybody backs away. Mm-hmm. You have to just step out into the unknown, and you have to be big and bold enough to know that you are the creator of your own destiny, and that the universe always works in our favor. And when you begin to understand that the things that keep showing up in our life are because those are the thoughts we never paid attention to that keep us returning back to the familiar. So if emotions are the end product of past experience, and you're living by the same emotion every day, then you're going to have a familiar life. Mm-hmm. Because emotions are energy in motion, which means that familiar emotion is going to keep creating the same familiar reality. And that emotion is going to drive your thoughts, and those thoughts are going to drive your emotions, and you're going to keep creating the same destiny. To step out into the unknown is to literally lay down the identity for a period of time and trust in the unseen. And that I think is where people in history right now, it's what they want. People they don't want to know about the old paradigms of religion or the old models of women and men. And no one cares politics. No one cares about. Everybody wants to be empowered by themselves. And when you have a group of people that are truly empowered by themselves, we have a tremendous amount of freedom. We have new inventions. We have genius mind. We have cooperation amongst humanity where I'm caring about you and you're caring about me. And when we make a choice, we consider the whole, not just ourself. When you live in survival and you live by those limited emotions, you're only concerned about the self. You break out of those emotional states that are addictive and the body's liberated and you're in a selfless state. You're only thinking about how you're going to make a difference, how you're going to contribute. And that is the new world that we're hopefully walking into.
What are you working on now? What are some of the things that you're looking at? So did neuroscience really evolve, or is that a place where you're sharing a lot of information and new things are coming on board? What's really exciting there?
Well,
in your world.
I tell
Take
you,
a walk our world too.
Well, we're doing a lot of workshops around the world right now. We have workshops, transformational workshops, and we have people being healed of cancer, being healed of, lupus. We have people having amazing experiences or rewriting their genes. We've had amazing things take place. And so I think that my interest completely is to inspire people to be the living example of all of this. Mm-hmm. I always say that, all of this is really good dinner conversation, but hardly anybody's ever changed from it. The people who say, I want to apply this to my life. I want to see if I could actually produce an effect in my world by changing the way I think and the way I feel. Now, the workshops that we're doing are producing dramatic effects because if the person's living by resentment for 25 years, the emotion of resentment has become so memorized that the body literally is swimming in that emotional state, and it keeps signaling the same gene that ultimately creates the cancer or disease. Unmemorized resentment, and you can't signal the same gene in the same way. If the person truly changes that, the body is going to reorganize itself instantaneously. So we are now documenting the changes that we are creating for people because we want to do it so that people give themselves permission to do it in their own lives. Mm-hmm. This is a time in history where there has to be a practical application of greatness. It has to be beyond just good dinner conversation. We have to be initiated into it. We have to step out. We have to be willing to live for the truth, not die for it, but to live for it. Mm-hmm. That's the first step.
Beautiful.
So we're taking a lot of this now into the corporate world now. We have a new program called Train the Trainers, which has become really exciting, and we're training educators. We're training mental health practitioners about the concept of plasticity and what change is. We got a new coaching model for people that want to coach. And I just finished my second book, and that's coming out at the beginning of the year, so that's exciting too.
Good.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll talk about it then.
Yeah.
Well, this was so much fun. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very insightful. Great. Beautiful. Juicy, isn't it? Really juicy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, much love, my beautiful co-creators, and we'll see you next time. Actually, we're going to Ashland to see Neil Donald Walsh and Gary Zukav. So much love. Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.